Israelis in general would say it was worse than that. It was worse than just being complacent to the threat from Gaza. Yes, they viewed the main enemy as the Shiite militia in the north, Hezbollah. And in the greater strategic picture, it's all Iran who is the main enemy there, who's, building this sort of ring of fire around Israel, going from Yemen to Syria, and then Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, and then Hamas in Gaza. The first place we went was Gaza.
What was the mission?
Well, it was the same as it should have been on October 7th, basically protecting those communal farms, basically protecting them from incursions by terrorists.
What is Zionism? What is a Zionist?
It's just people like simple answers, and they like simple things to hate and simple things to love.
What made you jump into the world of podcasting?
No, I was just gonna say I don't give a...
Danny Orvomaa, right? Do I pronounce it correctly?
Close enough. Orvomaa is Finnish, but it's not an original name.
Okay.
Yeah, but nobody gets offended. It's not originally even a Finnish name, so it's all translated back in the day when my family immigrated. So
Right.
So nobody will mind. Yeah.
Beautiful, Danny. Glad to have you, man.
Hey, so nice to be here. I feel like everyone else on your podcast has been such an amazing expert on subjects, and on my little podcast, I just run my mouth and
Yeah, it's pretty fun. So right before we started this one, I was on yours, and yours, for everybody who doesn't know, is called the Talking Ass, right?
No, just talking ass.
Just talking ass. All right. And I have a question for you. Do you consider yourself a talking ass, or is it so that every guest who comes on is a talking ass?
See, I can tell you the secret now because, it took 9 episodes for a listener of mine to figure it out. It's kind of sneaky highbrow, which is like my whole thing. Is you think this is a dumb jock or like a whatever, like an ignorant person, and that's like my whole vibe. But then sneakily, there's a lot of intellectual stuff going on. So it's from the Old Testament. Talking ass, it's Bilam and the talking ass. And I think there's a Rembrandt painting as well. And yeah, other than that, it's me who is the talking ass, I guess. Yeah. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a donkey. The ass, the ass is a donkey. It's not some kind of filth. But if it attracts by accident, like people looking for just like, I don't know, moronic chatter, then great. I welcome them all as friends,
Hmm. Did you draw those pictures yourself, by the way? The cover art.
Oh, that's proprietary information. No, I can't draw anything. As you like, I have zero talent outside of running my mouth. That's my main thing.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, I think we are at the
Mm.
same position when it comes to that. I can barely draw a smiley, so let alone something like that. Your
Yeah,
art to me is already beautiful for what I can do.
yeah.
Beautiful, man.
I have to apologize. By the way, I have to apologize for my outfit choice. This is such a serious, you have such serious business-like content, and I'm dressed in sports clothes. But I was thinking because I'm struggling with the flu a little bit. So, Michael Jordan had his famous flu game. Therefore, this is like my flu podcast. So I wore something a bit sporty.
Give us the introduction. Who is Danny Orvomaa?
Yeah, and I think, well, now it's interested in this world situation that we're in. I guess what you'd call some kind of low intensity World War III that we're unfortunately heading into or are already in. I guess what people are mostly interested in me on the internet is that when I was a young man, I served in both the Finnish and Israeli armies, which is quite rare, I guess. Well, I wasn't like a professional or a mercenary or anything like that. I just had a connection to both, and there's a draft in both countries, and that's just something that I then for a lot of years didn't even relate to that part of me at all. I became a completely different person, interested in all kinds of other things, as you can hear on on my show. Like anything could be interesting to me, and then now in recent years, I think that stuff is coming back to be more and more, and there are certain, obviously it's been a rough couple of years for maybe both countries in many ways.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's delve.
Oh, sorry, and a bit more about myself. Then after that, I went to university and became an educator for a while, and then moved into working for a tech company and things like that. But
Mm.
that's maybe less interesting.
Yeah, I'm
Mm,
sure we'll touch on a couple of those, and especially the connection to the Finnish army
yeah.
and to the Israeli army. I do have a couple of questions about that. I'm very curious why you think that connection to both is so rare, but let's keep that for later.
Mm,
Let's fulfill first a promise that we made at the end of your podcast episode. So for everybody who is switching from talking ass over to this podcast, the thing that we ended with was your public service announcement about complacency. And you warned that people should stay away from complacency. What did you mean by that exactly?
yeah, I don't know. I came up with it. I always finish my episodes with those, and I always some guests prepare them, but I always come up with them on the spot. And we found an interesting link between what we were talking about in just general life. If you remain put and you don't seek mentorship and you don't seek development and you don't seek help from other people, then you will be stuck, even if you're comfortable and maybe happy or at least content in your current job or just lifestyle or your current house or whatever. Then just inflation will take whatever 20% off
Mm,
of that contentment within a couple of years. And so basically we made this connection that can happen to countries too. And you look at this war that maybe Europe finds itself now. Maybe it's unfair. Some generals and other defense people would say it's an unfair comment, but Europe was caught with its pants down, very complacent when the invasion of Ukraine happened. Suddenly, we're searching for artillery shells and jet fighters wherever we can find them because we realize we're running low or whatever. And same in Israel, the October 7th attacks, which I think a lot of that was when we're looking on the micro level, just the soldiers on the border. There was a lot of complacency of settling down in this routine where no serious war has happened on this border in a few years. And it can be just like in your normal life, then maybe in more serious things between countries, there's like a connection with complacency, right?
yeah. And it's also, I think, a balance that you have to strike either on a societal level or on a personal level. Because I do get it, right? So the example that you laid out with Europe being caught with its pants down when the invasion of Ukraine happened,
Mm-hmm.
I do get it because we have been in peacetime for a long time, right? So why invest so much percentage of your GDP into defense?
Yeah.
Why not invest it in your citizens or in the beautiful things in life, right? In building up your country, stuff like that. And that works. That's perfectly fine until the war breaks out. Until something happens, until there's a catalyst.
Yeah.
Um, and that the same thing can be said about people to some degree, I think, because people that are living in good times, why, this is kind of a silly question, but why do they have to prepare for the bad times? Right. And to some degree, people do prepare for the bad times, right? That's the whole idea, for example, we prepare for the future. We have our pensions, right? We save money for a rainy day. We invest so our children later can go to university, right? That's all long-term vision that we do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we are also the kind of people that if we are very comfortable in our jobs, we stay there. We don't take any action anymore. Um,
Yeah.
it's a fine balance
Well,
to
in
strike.
my a lot of investors, which I know less about than traders and whatever, but maybe I know a bit about sports gambling in that world and in the investment world, that people always say that people hate to bet on the bad thing to happen. Therefore, that there's always this skew towards optimism, right? In people's behavior. And economists have made that argument too. So yeah, and actually often the smart money is in the bad thing happening, right? In your favorite team losing or whatever. the everyday example would be.
There's instantly a quote that you brought to my mind, and it's about investing. It's be greedy when everybody's fearful, and be fearful when everybody's greedy.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and just critical thinker in everything. Yeah, and I mean, when it comes, I'm not pretending to be an expert in like defense procurement or whatever Europe should have done to prepare for this war, or Israel on the other hand, but I think there's been enough stuff that is just publicly available information that anyone can read, that there was definitely a mistake made here where we were all betting on the bad thing not happening for however many 70 years it's been, or, you know. Yeah.
I do have a question for you here because for me, from an outside perspective, I've wondered um, how you look at how you look at this, or anybody from an Israeli perspective. So October 7th, absolutely insane what happened that day. I remember when the invasion started. I don't even know where I started catching up on it, but I saw it pretty much happening live with like live streams and things. It is probably one of the most insane things next to the World Trade Center that I've seen in my life. It was I don't know words for it, but I do know. So skip that whole episode for now. I do know that Netanyahu locally got a lot of flag. I'm not sure if that's the correct word, but a lot of resistance for being complacent, for allowing this to happen.
Yes.
So from my perspective, what I saw is that from a couple of different points in that border, there was an invasion happening at the same time. So you could make the argument, I think, that there was an overwhelming force that was attacking at the same time, which is something that's very hard to prepare for. But that's just a general thought. That's not based on anything. So with the word complacency in mind, was it complacent what happened? How do you look at that?
Israelis in general would say it was worse than that. So
Okay.
it was worse than just being complacent to the threat from Gaza. Yes, if you look at just the defense establishment, yes, they viewed the main enemy as the Shiite militia in the north, Hezbollah, right? And obviously in the greater strategic picture, it's all Iran who is the main enemy there, who's, you know, building this sort of ring of fire around Israel, going from Yemen to Syria, not anymore after the Assad regime fell, and then Hezbollah in southern Lebanon.
Right.
So, and then Hamas in Gaza. But they viewed that Hezbollah was the main dangerous enemy, and of course, a lot of resources were spent there. Sure, that was part of the problem. But the other part, it's a little bit worse than the just complacency, was that Netanyahu, who's been in Israeli politics for at least 35 years or something, was back in the day, I don't know, 20 years ago or so, or even a bit before then, was propping up Hamas to weaken the Palestinian Authority, right? So you could argue that it's not just complacency. It was always misjudging what it will do if you try to weaken the Palestinian Authority, which, with all its flaws, was always a partner, to some extent, even a potential legitimate partner in peace talks, and had some kind of potential to move this conflict forward to a better place. Whereas Hamas, there was never any potential for it with them, right? Extremists are extremists everywhere. So propping up Hamas or weakening the Palestinian Authority on purpose, which props up Hamas, was also one of the original mistakes, on top of complacency, right?
Right. Yeah. Although, so could you make the argument that ignorance played a role here? That back then, 20 years ago, it was not really known or realized yet what Hamas would be capable of later? Because I think that if you look back since the moment that Hamas came into power, it's pretty clear what their agenda was. And their agenda was not building up the country for the better of their citizens. That's my personal view on it, because they've been pretty set in their ways on. Well, I think it's. I don't want to use the words in this podcast episode, but their slogan pretty much has been from the beginning. aimed at destruction. It was not aimed at building up their
Yeah.
country. So it was pretty clear. But before they came into power, so before the Palestinian Authority, I believe that's what they're called, was replaced by
Yeah.
Hamas. Could you make the argument that it was ignorance playing a role there to think about what Hamas could be capable
Yeah,
of?
well, replaced is a very kind word there, Jeffrey. The back 20 years ago, Hamas took over the Gaza Strip violently from the PA and threw Fatah or Palestinian Authority people off of roofs and stuff. So it was replaced might be a little kind here, but yes,
Mm.
uh, sure, nobody knew what it was going to be, and yes, of course they're extremists, and their charter tells you that, and also their behavior much before October 7th. That was just an incredible show of how much power they've gotten and to what extent they've built a functional sort of extremist army in the Gaza Strip. That came as a surprise to the world, I think, and to Israel as well. But the I don't know if we can now, in retrospect, then judge. There must have been some kind of strategic decision to weaken the Palestinian Authority at that time for some reason. And, I don't understand it, but they must have had a logic behind it back then. And yeah, but now we're here today. To a certain extent, always the history matters to me less. I mean, what will happen now? I personally don't enjoy observing war or participating in them. To me, the tragedy is equal. If, I have a child, if I see a wounded or, God forbid, dead child, I don't even need to ask where in the world or on which side of the fence this has happened. It's an unimaginable tragedy regardless. And if by the way, if like ethically or morally you're not in that place, then it's kind of, you don't have a leg to stand on. It's hard for me to even move forward with a productive conversation. So I think most decent people are there. That's just to maybe give a background of how I view this. But what interests me is maybe less the mistakes that were made in the past, but what are we achieving now?
Mm.
Like, where are these two wars? I'm less of an expert, maybe even on the Ukraine, but in both, you could maybe argue it's like, what is the end game? Israel says that it's to return the hostages and to destroy Hamas's ability to maintain rule in Gaza. Well, what's the alternative? That's just political sloganing, because the Palestinian Authority, with ample help from Israel, but also due to their own corruption and inability to govern, is a non-entity. Today, we are way closer to a situation where Hamas takes over the West Bank as well, than to a situation where the Palestinian Authority can govern Gaza. And if that happens, if the West Bank becomes similarly 100% Hamas, then this conflict will be in a worse place than it has ever been in its history, if it already isn't there, you know, in today's situation. So yeah, the tomorrow is what I try to look forward to, and how we achieve that. And there are obviously emotional topics here. War crimes should be prosecuted on both sides, but based on real evidence, not I would say, when it comes to based on just something said emotionally on the internet, that doesn't make it true. Also with numbers, it's a cynical way to view warfare in the first place, is to count the number of deaths and pick your side based on which side had more deaths. Therefore they must be the innocent underdog, and the other one is
Mm.
the other one is the aggressor. Because with that logic, I believe Russia has had more deaths in the Ukrainian war than the Ukrainians. But yeah, um, I I don't. It's hard to put these things into words, but my point is that there has to be some kind of productive conversation of what does the day after tomorrow look like in the Gaza Strip and more widely in the Middle East. And the Israeli government under Bibi, under Netanyahu, I think has failed to even address the issue. They haven't provided any kind of vision.
This conflict, specifically the one in the Middle East, it is such a complex. Well, it's simple in some ways. It's incredibly deep and complex in other ways. And what I find myself constantly in a position that if I look into it, I don't even know where to begin with looking into, the simple naive question about who is wrong, what bad decisions were made, how did we get here, because the history that people will bring forward is almost endless. And from one perspective, I would say, okay, but hold on a second, the things that are happening right now, right? I don't need 1,000 years of history to tell me if it's right or wrong what is happening. But at the same time, I certainly understand that context is also a very important element to consider. So, with that in mind, and with your comment about having a vision for tomorrow in mind, in your personal view, what would that tomorrow look like? So, you mentioned coming around the table and having a conversation with each other. But given the complexities of the conflict at hand, what do you think practically that conversation should lead to?
Ah, you are asking me to solve the conflict in the Middle East. Uh,
It's a very tough question. I perfectly realize that.
uh, I think it's maybe useful to view what has been proposed, right, by various people who are much more intelligent and
Mhm.
knowledgeable than I am. Before October 7th, there was quite, I mean, Israeli society was in shambles with the protests. And remember, before October 7th, Israeli society was at a stage where tens of thousands of reservists were signing letters that we will not serve in this government's wars, etc. And then it wasn't really true, because after October 7th, a lot of reserve units were reporting 120% of people showed up, as in more people than were invited. But anyway, uh, other than Israeli society internally, the Middle East views strategically were quite optimistic. There was a peace process, some kind of undercover peace process happening between Israel and Saudi Arabia, for example.
You mean the
And
Benjamin Accords?
the Abraham Accords, they were called, but
Abraham Accords.
yeah, so even that Saudi Arabia, the center of the Sunni Islamic world, and a Wahhabist Islamic country, would be potentially joining the Abraham Accords. And then if they were to, there would be a whole new visions of a new type of Silk Road through the Middle East for energy and other commerce, and that would compete with the Russian view for their Silk Roads that they're trying to build.
Mm.
There's this whole like bigger strategic picture had some optimism in it, and partially that's what motivated Hamas in these attacks. They're not stupid. They knew that the not well, forget even about their radical Islamist vision of destroying Israel and killing all the Jews. Just the vision of any kind of solution for the Palestinian statehood question, for example, all of that would be forgotten very quickly. Like that would be put on the wayside if Saudi Arabia agrees to join the Abraham Accords without the condition of Palestinian independence before then,
Mhm.
for example.
Mhm.
So yeah, now maybe that's all off the table. Uh, Maybe the talks have finished. Maybe they are going on in the background still between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Who knows? That's not something we can know right now. But yeah, what do I view is okay, optimistically speaking, for Gaza, the Palestinian Authority is the only option. I mean, who else? But there's no like, there's no other even realistic option. So somehow we need to save the Palestinian Authority from bankruptcy, and then uh, somehow uh, eliminate Hamas, which will be for the IDF, the Israeli army, to probably do on its own if they can. And then that maybe would provide a more peaceful existence for everyone. Sure, that's the optimistic way to view it. Uh, the details of that will be have to be worked out by people smarter than us, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, what is your?
And sorry, and then
Mhm.
sorry, just one more thing. And the Palestinian Authority, as anyone in Israel would tell you, because they know them better than even better than I do, is not what's it called, some kind of magic silver bullet solution. Because you would also simultaneously, while saving them from bankruptcy and their inability to govern, you would also somehow have to eliminate from them the same extremist elements that exist in Hamas as well. The Palestinian Authority school books, for example, are notoriously anti-Semitic and things like that. It's not that extremism doesn't exist in the PA; it does, right? I mean, maybe those who are older than us remember that Fatah and organizations like that linked to the Palestinian organization, the PLO and the Palestinian Authority were terrorists in Europe and in Israel before. So that then it's not easy to do this. Also, their leader, Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, is 100,096,000 years old. So he's unfortunately gonna go eventually. A true leader has not emerged from that side of Palestinian affairs that would be an obvious choice that could, first of all, even lead the West Bank away from extremism and Hamas, not to even mention take over Gaza as well. So generally, I guess, not very optimistic.
Yeah, I wonder how you would put it into practice. Because and again, this is from me, from a ignorant outsider's perspective who doesn't know anything about the region in general. So feel free to correct me anytime you feel that there's something wrong in there. But I wonder how you reach that point, because if everybody in the Gaza region right now, so let me rephrase this. Hamas has been in power for what, 20 years?
Yeah.
Okay, so most people in their 30s almost can't remember a time without them.
Yeah.
That means that they had free reign to indoctrinate everybody who gets born over there. Right? It's a situation where nobody remembers the old times anymore, because I think also the amount of seniority over there, so 40 people that are 40 years or older, is very low over there. So I don't think anybody remembers, back in the day, whatever back in the day may mean. Which means that if we go with your example of waiting for a proper leader to come forward, to present an alternative which could be manifested within the Palestinian Authority, then the question that you have to ask yourself is that person not indoctrinated with the same ideas that are right now dominant over there? So would you not just replace one name with another name, but have the same underlying ideology under it?
Yes, exactly.
So I wonder how it would look practically.
Well, this is a major reason why it's so hard to imagine any kind of more moderate organization ruling over this population. But there is maybe a little silver lining there. Remember, yes, they have kind of created like an Islamist North Korea, you could argue, where they rule everything and they touch every aspect of everyone's life and have indoctrinated a whole population into hatred. By the way, I'm not saying that Israel hasn't made terrible mistakes and done awful things as well. I'm just saying that the indoctrination is very heavy on hatred and messianic beliefs of slaughtering another population will somehow bring you to some kind of paradise-like existence, and back to your homes that you maybe vacated 4 or 5 generations ago. Like, sure, that's part of it. But another part of it is that, remember, they also rule like ruthless gangsters, as in, because they are both the police and the criminals in this society, then there is this potential and this, like, we've seen some video evidence of it, that there is this bubbling minor undercurrent in Gazan society that blames this entire war on Hamas, as they should, and that thinks that they have brought that whole place to ruin since they took over. And yes, and again, with the ample help from the other side. Of course, Israel has had it under blockade, naval and trade blockade and everything. But yes, there are some people that view them as brutal gangsters, which they are. So, if Hamas takes protection money from you like the mafia would, which they do everywhere, over every, you could argue, most transactions in the Gaza Strip. Well, who can you complain to when the police is Hamas as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Right?
it's gonna be pretty damn tough.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, again, now we've gone into like this big, I guess, strategic political talk, which often when you talk about this conflict, you have to go into that because that's what people are thinking about. But really, I mean, I have to say as a disclaimer that there are, on these topics, there's a million people out there who will give you more nuanced and
Mm-hmm.
based on more experience perspectives on all of this. But I'm just sort of, maybe I can act as a summary of the like some kind of aggregator of what's being said out
Yeah,
there, right?
yeah. Like I said,
Mm.
this whole thing, and the same thing can be said about the Ukrainian and Russia war. It's so gigantically complex, and there's so much happening over there that it's, from an outsider's perspective, it's impenetrable almost, and you almost need to work with not necessarily assumptions, but with preemptive conclusions, I suppose, about what's happened. There's just way too much. There's just too much.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
too complex. What is your personal connection to the IDF? Because you mentioned in the beginning that you served in both the Finnish army and also in the IDF army.
Yeah.
Well, the IDF is the army, so the Israeli Defense Forces. And you also mentioned that is rare. So why is it rare, and what is your connection to both?
Well, I think I'm sure there are others, and I know of others who are, I guess, like half Finnish, half Israeli, who I think they just make a choice and they do one of them and then just make a life in that country that they chose, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's relatively rare to do both. For me, my background, and I mean, we're still, even there are maybe others who've done both armies, but we're still talking about maybe 4 people, and maybe to their misfortune, they're not as up to running their mouth publicly as I am.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I grew up in Finland in a Jewish family, and in the family more broadly, there is like this whole Zionism, or like this connection to Israel, is not very common. They're all normal, everyday Finnish people. But for me, at some point, it became important, and I knew that I had like this, what would you call it? Uh, Connection, like deeper connection to this other homeland, and some of it is just my personality. Some of it isn't ideology, and although that was part of it, some of it is just maybe Finland seemed like a small place in a backwater of Europe, and I wanted to be somewhere more exciting and maybe a part of history rather than just reading about history, or some kind of naive young person idea like that, right? But yeah, a lot of it was also ideological. I viewed that um, I I did see that there was a need to defend this place in the Middle East, which is like an island of good things, although there are a lot of bad things too in that society, which I'm happy to talk about as well. But in general, between Morocco and India, there aren't that many places where things that I appreciate happen, which is democracy, human rights, uh, minority rights, whether sexual or ethnic or religious. And I did sort of, yeah, develop. Then it became a very practical connection too. I connected with, friends and more remote family that lived out there, and then decided that I thought I wanted to make life there. And part of that life is then obviously serving in the army. But I knew that I wouldn't leave Finland without serving, because I had a member of the family who was a naval officer in Finland, and I was also kind of very clearly told that that is something that you will do as well, you know. So it was under 1 year in Finland, and it was back then. The Finnish army, now they've joined NATO, and now things have gotten a lot more serious in Eastern Europe, right? Finland has a 1,000 kilometer border with Russia, But back then, I perhaps somewhat unfairly didn't give that army very much credit or that whole experience. I felt like everyone was just counting the days to get out, and the Russian bear isn't going to come across the border, and we're just cold and miserable skiing in the snow and, sleeping in
Mm,
tents in the snow, and like, what are we here for? But that was probably a little unfair. I think it grew me as a person somewhat, and I learned enough sort of military skills as well that then the Israeli army in a combat unit felt a lot easier initially when I started that one.
mhm.
Yeah.
So to get the timeline straight, in which year did you serve in the Finnish army?
2009 to 2010.
Right. Okay. So that was before the invasion of Crimea.
No, so yeah, the Crimean invasion was like a sneaky one, right? They were talking about those men in green pajamas or whatever they were
Yeah.
saying, though, and nobody really knew if they were separatists or obviously they were Spetsnaz or whatever Russian special forces, but Russia was still arguing that they were local separatists who took over
Right.
Crimea, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Okay. So that then I understand also why that sentiment was there within the Finnish army that people couldn't wait to get out because what's the point? The big bear of Russia is not going to invade anyway.
No, and not everyone. I mean, there's obviously people who were much more mature than me and realized that even if, I might be right about that at the time, that doing something in life, you should generally try to do it properly. You'll learn more and get more out of it. So there were a lot of people who put much more in it themselves in terms of effort and attitude than I did. And they obviously got more out of it, probably. And they probably have a very different view, even people who might have served in the same years as
Hmm.
me. So it's not, and also, as I said earlier, I was a draft soldier in both armies. Like there are also professional soldiers in both countries that are, widely respected, I think, regardless of what year they got into it, even if it was before when. Anyway, that just a disclaimer.
Yeah.
But yeah, there were a lot of people like me as well. There was definitely a big friendship group in my unit in Finland that didn't really care that much.
Yeah. Yeah, fair,
Yeah.
fair enough.
Yeah.
And the IDF was 2013, 2014, right? If I'm not
No,
mistaken.
I 2011 to 2013, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So 2012 there was a war there. No ground invasion of Gaza. The ground invasion of Gaza happened in the summer of 2014, and I was just out. So the previous larger war in the Gaza Strip, there was
Right.
a sort of a war that lasted, what was it, like a month in the winter of 2012, and then the summer of 2014 there was a bigger a ground incursion into Gaza, and then I was already out, but the people I had served with were definitely in that war. Because when you come from abroad, and I was a couple of years older, obviously due to the Finnish army and stuff, then you have a shortened service in Israel.
Right. Okay. So what was going on
Yeah.
when you were serving there?
Well, I mean, first of all, initially, like, what's going on? You arrive in a foreign country and you think you want to make a life there, and it's not a foreign country. I mean, I was there on holiday several times, and family and friends there, and it's not really foreign. And obviously, when if you're Jewish, the culture, at least the Jewish side of the culture, is very kind of familiar. But it's also the Middle East, and you arrive, as an immigrant, basically. You have to first make a life for yourself and learn the language properly and find a place to live, make friends. I studied a year at the university there as well before the army. So, yeah. And then when you join, firstly, back then, I mean, I can probably say a lot of stuff publicly that I maybe shouldn't have back then because everything has changed since I was there. But you first immigrants serve in this, like, do like a month's course or 3 weeks or whatever, where you receive a little bit of local mentorship about what unit you might want to serve in and how to get in if it's tough to get into. And also you meet a lot of friends who are in the same situation. And that, yeah, it's like a preparation course for immigrants, but it's a full on in the army already. Like you're under military discipline, and arguably the discipline side was probably tighter there than it was in my actual unit later. But yeah, after that, then you join the draft like any Israeli, um, and then you end up somewhere. I would say people like me who maybe came from abroad were at the time much more motivated than the average Israeli youth. Again, back then there might have been some of that complacency we talked about, might have been going on there back then too. So the vast majority of the immigrants or other foreign volunteers and stuff end up in pretty high profile combat units.
Mm-hmm.
And then you arrive in one of those and you start training. And yeah, at the time I was, I had prepared, I'd gotten myself physically fit, I thought. They then whip you into proper shape early on, but I had prepared for it. Plus I had another army in the background. And so initially I was pretty good at it, like considered a very good soldier. And so the training was about whatever it was, 9 months or something. And then you join an operational unit, or you go into leadership courses, or some people who might want to go to the officer track or the career soldier track. There's, then you kind of split up a little bit. And then, I mean, our operational unit was the first place we went was Gaza. So the border with Gaza.
What was the mission?
It was the same as it should have been on October 7th, basically protecting those. There's a lot of agricultural communities there, so kibbutzim they're called, communal farms.
Mm-hmm.
So basically protecting them from incursions by terrorists. Obviously, we can't do much against rocket fire and mortars. That was happening a lot too. But the things you can do are, it was both passive and active protection. As in, there was a lot of just, I guess, border guard aspects to it, which was just patrols and ambushes and things like that you set up just in case. But then there was also some more active stuff, like maybe you have to go somewhere and check out whether there's a tunnel there, and there are special forces who are experts in tunnels and stuff, but anyway, it's the general infantry that does a lot of the prep work and a lot of the everyday work on that border.
Right. Okay.
Back then that border looked very different. Like, they made a massive investment in defense and in the security apparatus on that border. All of that massive investment failed clearly on October 7th, but back then, basically you're very close. We're talking a few hundred, in some cases a couple of 100 meters from the first Palestinian houses in the strip, and you can see life there, and they are definitely watching you. And there was basically just a fence. I mean, there was back then too fancy sensor equipment and video surveillance and stuff like that, but when you look at it from an infantry soldier's perspective, it was basically just a fence separating you from a fairly inhospitable place.
Yeah. Okay. So if I got it correctly, there were 3 threats which you were aware of. That was the threat from the air, so mortar fire, rockets, those kind of things. It was the threat from underground, the tunnels, and it was the threat from direct incursions, so cutting the fence, getting through the fence, that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Those were the 3 things you were watching out for. And can you walk me through that? So on a typical day when you were doing your patrols, or you were doing your investigation, how did that practically look? Did you walk? So what did you see? How did it look? What did you scan? From someone without a military background, can you walk me through the process? What do you look for? Where do your eyes go?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert on how this is done today. Everything has changed so much with drones, and basically every platoon would have their own drone, if not several nowadays. And, the lessons learned from the Ukraine every week, probably infantry strategies change. Back then, you had basically, as infantry, you had basically 3 observational things you more or less did. Patrols, and they can be vehicular or on foot, which is more or less to see, as a general rule, everyone there is trying to just see if anything looks different. because anything that looks different could blow up or could be a sign of some kind of preparation on the other side um, to do something, right? So patrols, then you have just certain observational spots where you have the advantage, where you can observe more than the other side can observe you. So those would be, ambush style things.
Hmm.
Um, and then there's you also need to support. I mean, there are other things on the border as well: tanks, air force, everything. Then there's a lot of like support missions for what they're doing. Yeah, as a general rule, you're in there most days. Nothing happens. You're sitting in either a vehicle or walking to a certain point where you want to go look if anything's different, and it
Yeah,
should
right.
be.
Maybe this is a
Yeah.
silly question, but I'm really curious about that fence. So, were people, people, not soldiers per se, not people in the military, but were citizens from either side allowed to touch the border, to touch the fence? How close could they
Okay.
come to the fence?
Yeah. So as a general rule, they shouldn't, but back then it did happen all the time.
Hmm.
My company commander got badly blown up by an IED that was put in that on that fence. Um, and later on, as part of a different operation where a fence crossing was involved, he got his hands blown off. Um, like, sorry, your question was with the fence. If people come up to it, generally they were up to no good. There were also just Palestinian civilians from Gaza, I'm sure, who were trying to just cross because life over there may have turned too desperate for them for various reasons, whether economic or family, or maybe they ended up on the wrong side of Hamas's opinion of them or whatever. Um, they're all treated the same, as in no one. If you're not armed, you're not going to be shot on that border. Um, we we also took some people like just prisoner alive, and then waited for the security services to come interrogate them. Like, why are they coming up to that fence? Who are they? And yeah, but yes, there are armed people trying to cross, whether through tunnels or through cutting holes in that fence to either kidnap soldiers or murder civilians, or both,
Right.
and things like that. Yeah, and those people are obviously shot. That's a general rule if they can be seen.
Yeah, and I can imagine it's very so. The reason why I'm asking about specifically that fence is because I can imagine, and this is once again a complete assumption. So if anything that you're hearing is out of place, let me know that. But I can imagine that if there's desperation in play, right? People from Gaza being desperate and they want to flee from Hamas or something like that. They have two places to go, I believe. Either they go to the west towards Egypt, or they go towards the northeast to go into Israel. So I can imagine that if people
Mm.
were fleeing and they were coming to that fence because they wanted to flee from Gaza, that will be. Can you walk me through that scenario? Because I have a couple of questions here. You told me as long as they are not armed, so as long as they are not perceived as a threat, they will not get shot. So
No,
that,
I think in any army that has some kind of ethical standards, that's generally, hopefully, in
yeah,
most cases, that's
I can hope
how you
so.
do it.
So okay,
Yeah.
so they would come up to the fence and they will be taken and they will be interrogated to see what they're really up to, because I can imagine manipulation also happens, right? You can have like people with bad intent coming over to say like, hey, I'm trying to flee for whatever it is I'm doing, and then they get in and then they do something that is not good. So how does that process work? They get in, they get taken, they get interrogated. What are the options for them? What will they be automatically sent back? Is there a way for them into Israel? How does the process look
Yeah,
like?
see, well, that's well beyond my pay grade. So basically, what the army would hand them over to the Shin Bet, the Shabak, which is the internal security services, then
Okay.
who then know more about this person, or learn it in interrogations and decide on what the right move is. Do they
Hmm.
do they get sent back as an informant, or do they get settled in Israel, or have they committed a crime and do they have to go to prison? I No idea. So that's yeah, that's for generally for someone else to determine.
Right. Yeah, fair enough.
You
Fair
know,
enough.
the soldiers have a lot of responsibility in the West Bank, where it's much more you're living amongst the local civilian population. There, you will much more run into this situation where like a 19 or 20-year-old recruit in the infantry will have to like decide on whether this person is truthful and just trying to get to work and whether they should be allowed to do that, or whether there's something going on here and need to call back up and interrogate this person. That happens much more in the West Bank. On the Gaza border in my time, it was much more clear that this was a war zone. Like, generally, no one is out there for fun.
Right. And maybe a silly question, but why was it different? So why was there a border with Gaza, but why were people living amongst each other in the West Bank? What's the difference?
Well, that's a big question in this conflict in general. You know, the West Bank, there are no borders. Partially way further back in history, there have been Jews and Muslims and Christians living there mixed in certain historical hotspots. But also more recently, the settler movement, like after 1967, when Israel conquered the West Bank from Jordan in the Six-Day War. Early on, certain leaders in the army and in the political establishment recognized that the only way to protect Israel is to have settlements here. That you need to have local populations on certain. There's like a topographical issue there too. Like the middle of Israel is low by the sea, right? Tel Aviv is by the Mediterranean, whereas you go up to the West Bank. The West Bank is a lot of hills, high hills. So there's obviously Jordanian artillery before Israel's victory in that war was shelling Israeli communities, at will from the West Bank to Israel. And that's, so they conquered it, and then there was military rule, and then you had the Oslo Accords where certain areas became fully under Palestinian rule and certain areas are still fully under Israeli military rule, and then there are in between areas where sort of a little bit of both is going on. The Oslo Accords, clearly we know now, not the most successful idea ever, because it didn't really solve anything. But anyway, so that's why in practice the soldiers there are amongst the population, because in some areas, like these people, you have to protect the settlers, the Israeli citizens who live there in settlements. You have to protect them from violence against them, and then to some extent also the other way around. Like the settlers aren't innocent in this.
Right.
They like in general, these people can do nasty things to one another. And when it comes to the human capacity to do that, I don't see a difference between whether you're a Jewish or Muslim or Christian or Buddhist or whatever.
The word Zionist is a word that often comes forward. And this is once again a question from ignorance. I don't know what the answer to this question is. Everybody, you hear it all the time. People that are in favor of Israel or Zionists or something along those lines. That word pops up everywhere, and to me it feels very arbitrary. Let's get the definitions down. What is Zionism? What is a Zionist? What is being referred to?
Yeah. So all kinds of conspiracy dum-dums and neo-Nazis and whatever, and a lot of Islamists on the internet will have convinced you that it's some kind of evil cabal that's ruling the world. No, it was an ideology that started mostly in Europe, and it was that the Jews needed a solution to all the persecution and slaughter that they were experiencing as this sort of wandering people that was a guest in every country they went to. And they had a homeland, which they had a spiritual and to some extent practical connection to for 2,000 years, even if they were living in what they would call exile. And the Theodor Herzl, for example, was an early Zionist sort of person who put this ideology into writing. And proposed that the only solution is for the Jewish people to go home and have a, eventually have a modern nation state amongst all the other nation states, like everybody else. There were also other visions. Some said that yes, Zionism is correct and we need to have our own country, but the Middle East is not the answer. It should be Uganda, for example, in Africa or something. But yes, I mean, the land of Israel was the homeland. Then that was sort of early Zionism. Nowadays, it just means a person who believes that the current Jewish state, that the state of Israel should exist and should live in peace and harmony amongst other nations. That's more or less the definition of it.
Right. Okay.
And then, yeah. Yes, and of course, amongst Jewish people, you have lots of different ways to relate to that word. Some, especially amongst the very religious, ultra-Orthodox community, especially amongst them, you'll have a lot of Jews who believe that only the Messiah, whenever he comes, is the one that can deliver this sort of salvation to the Jewish people and deliver their own homeland. So they don't believe in the secular idea of a nation state here and now. Those, by the way, live in Israel too. In Israel, a lot of Jewish people don't serve in the army and don't even believe that the state has any kind of relevance. I mean, they take the benefits and stuff from the state, but they just study the Torah and don't really contribute to things like the defense of the realm or taxes or jobs or anything like that. So, and then you have a lot of left-wing Zionism, which is very secular and combines it with socialism. I mean, these are the people who built up the state of Israel early on and were in power for the first decades of the state of Israel as well, politically. These are the people who want to work the land and living on a communal farm, working the land. That's how you build a country, and then serving in the army as well, of course. And then you have nowadays what is, if you ask me, unfortunately, what has been in power or has been a very influential doctrine is right-wing religious Zionism. So the right in Israel has allied itself for various reasons, ideological and also practical, of forming governments. You need coalition partners and stuff, has allied itself with religion. So the religious right views all of the they often have more claims to the West Bank, for example, that you can't evacuate any of those settlements and try to reach a peace agreement there, that you should take it all. And they have these kind of ideas. Also, it's like a more messianic Zionism, where they believe that they serve the modern state, but there is like this divine calling to do so. That hard for me to explain because I don't really subscribe to that ideology. But the point is that they that ideology, you could argue, maybe has some racist elements in it too. Like they don't particularly care for what the Palestinians, or they call them Arabs, what they want in this conflict, and whatever. I mean, those guys look at current government ministers, for example, like Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. If anyone wants to look into those people, I mean, these are pretty nasty characters. And they are in power because the right needs the religion and the sort of messianic right-wing Zionist parties to form a coalition and stay in power. There are probably better explanations of the word Zionist out there than mine.
No, but this helps because literally, I'm like I said before, I'm asking this from a position of ignorance, and I think so. Let me double check two things that I heard. So the first one is a feeling that I'm having, and it feels like the last form of Zionism that you mentioned, that extreme right Zionism, that is right now being. If it feels to me like if people nowadays during riots, which also happened in Netherlands, use the word Zionist, it sounds to me like they're referring to that specific form of Zionism instead of Zionism as a core definition. Would you say that is unfair or incorrect?
Yeah, or they're just referring to Jews and they don't want to be accused of it. I think it's
Right.
hard for me to know what motivates people.
Yeah.
I think it's just people like simple answers and they like simple things to hate and simple things to love. Like, tell me who's right and who's wrong. Let me pick a team. And then if you have this cool, slightly evil sounding word that I can attach to the other team that I've now decided I hate, then I think that's most of it.
Yeah.
I don't think they maybe really, like, for example, a lot of the left, which views the whole Israeli state project as a colonial project, and that's why they're against it. There are other reasons, by the way. The extreme left is, there are people funding it and have been. Back in the day, it was the KGB funding these ideas in the West, and nowadays there's Qatar and Iran and Hezbollah and whoever. Some of it isn't accidental, but basically what you hear from the left is the reason they're on the Palestinian side of this is that they are a poor victim people fighting a colonial aggressor, that the Jewish project in the Middle East is like a land grab. Well, sure, but you know, it depends on which point of history you choose to start observing this. Let me give you like a practical example. For example, the IRA in Ireland, they are very much like pro Hamas and support them and view the Hamas as having the same struggle as they had, and even support their tactics to a large extent, because they used some of the same tactics. But really, if you tell them, like, do you want to go back a little bit in this history, and you might find an even better parallel for you and the IRA struggle in Northern Ireland, in the Jewish pre-state, pre-Israeli army Jewish groups who were fighting the British were the same. They were fighting the British colonial overlords, same enemy, and they even both blew up a famous hotel with the some Jewish groups in what was then British Mandate Palestine blew up the King David in Jerusalem, and the IRA blew up the Grand Hotel in Brighton. So like the IRA could have found a massive parallel for their struggle on the other side of the fence, and they've just chosen to pick one point in history and decided that that's the team they're choosing. And this like choosing of teams to me is what maybe annoys me and confuses me most, is that because you have certain values that put you on the certain side of the political map, that means you've let yourself from that side of the political map just brainwash you onto a certain side of a conflict that you know nothing about. The right is very heavily on Israel's side, and the left is on the other side, right? And why? I mean, if you have, I don't know, left-wing values, you will find that a lot of Israeli society shares those values with you. And if you are on the right and I don't know, for example, the evangelical Christian movement in the United States is very pro-Israel, well, wouldn't Jesus want you to equally view a dead Palestinian child as a tragedy? Would Jesus really be picking sides like this? I don't get the whole picking a team based on, your values from home or whatever in these conflicts. It's a very complex issue that I have lived with my entire life, and I know nothing. I know absolutely nothing. Therefore, if you haven't studied this thing your whole life, you definitely know nothing.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't like, yeah. Well, sorry, that got a little heated. I'm just saying that it's a very complex place. And this isn't just some kind of simple struggle between worldviews, that it's a Western democracy against Islam or another civilization. That's a simplified way of looking at it. Sure, you could say that on Israel's borders is also in many ways the border between the Western world and something else. Great. But also within Israeli society, you have a lot of institutions and people that hold values that you would maybe put in the Eastern world versus Western world. It's very complex. Also, it's not just Jews against Muslims. Like, there are Christian Palestinians, and there are Christian Israelis, and there are the Druze, the Bedouins, the Baha'i. You mention it. Like, these are groups that are completely forgotten in this conflict often. For example, last year there was that rocket attack from Hezbollah. That was, I don't know if it was on purpose aimed at this village or if it was a stray rocket that hit Majd al-Shams. Majd al-Shams is a Druze village in the Golan Heights that I've had the privilege of visiting a couple of times. And I didn't know this, by the way, until I looked into that attack. A lot of the rocket killed, was it 12 children playing a soccer match. And some of those children and their families are Syrian citizens. And you go, whoa, I thought I knew a lot about this conflict. I thought Syria and Israel have been in a state of war for decades. How can there be just Syrian citizens in this village that I've visited and shaken hands with and eaten at the same cafes with? Well, that's just a piece of the complexity of this thing. The Druze and other groups like the Bedouins, obviously the borders of modern nation states, whether through colonial decisions of drawing lines with a ruler on a map, or whether through warfare that changed the borders, have been separated. So modern nation states' borders separate village from village, brother from brother, cousin from cousin, and they can live on both sides of the border. And with the Druze, I have to say, pay attention to that. No media will tell you this, but Islamists who took power in Syria are now persecuting them, kidnapping them, murdering them, etc. And nobody talks about it. And the Druze in Israel have actually a massive protest movement going on that the Israeli army should protect the Druze minority in Syria.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that doesn't get any attention?
It's not sexy. People find these simple teams sexy, and this, like, I don't know. There are various reasons. Obviously, the Holy Land is obviously something that's emotional to so many millions of people, and everyone has an emotional connection to this. And yeah, this is a. No, but don't let like a good story be confused by facts, is I guess the thing. Don't let a simple answer be confused by a complex issue where only humility and learning is the way to even pretend to understand a piece of this conflict. The only commentators on this topic that I personally respect are people who are even more humble than me and have more expertise. Like I can be a bit, I guess, arrogant even. But I heard recently this Finnish, like he was a defense analyst and a researcher, like a proper expert in the Middle East in the Finnish defense establishment. And this was a person who understood exactly this, that it's a very complex place, that the more you learn, the less you understand, and the more you realize might never be understood. That is you can't guess what's going to happen next. It's very unpredictable and complex, this region. And yeah, hatred is never the answer. Like, learn about your neighbors, learn their culture, their language, eat their food, listen to their music. There's a part of me has become a massive hippie through it all. And yeah, I don't know if any of that was smart.
There's a very beautiful side to that. And I also think that's a very good way to... Let me ask you one more question specifically about that side before we move to the next topic. So, regarding beauty, does anything about your time in the Israeli Defense Force stand out to you as something that showed you humanity in its most beautiful form?
Hey, what an amazing question, because I wanted to say something about this, that with all my reflections, first of all, personally, after the army, I just cut it all loose and moved to a different country, and I don't live there anymore and chose not to pay taxes and whatever, live in that country. Now I'm dealing with it in retrospect. It's hard to say what the young man then thought about things, because some of those thoughts might be confused with what I'm thinking now. But there were moments. First of all, this is an incredibly beautiful place. The West Bank with its rolling hills, the Gaza Strip has potential to be a, I don't know, I guess that's a bit Trumpian to say that there are beautiful beaches there that could be resorts. But anyway, Israel itself, what a really diverse in terms of history, architecture, archaeology, even. It's even a hotspot for human evolution studies, because that's where humans made it out of Africa. Uh, that's the exit from Africa for our ancestors.
Mhm.
And all of this exists in this tiny place, and it is incredibly beautiful. And I did have moments when I appreciated just even the desert that you think is nothing. You can just be in the middle of nowhere and appreciate the beauty. And it's sad to me that that is not the main thing that people talk about when they talk about this place, is not the beauty of it. And then the beauty of the cultural diversity that okay, what you're maybe looking for is like a cute cross-border, cross-cultural interaction. Happened less because when you're wearing a uniform and a gun, it's not a fair position from which to connect with the other side, for example, and have a real deep conversation with
Yeah.
a civilian, for example. It's not.
Mhm.
You're in a position of authority there,
Mhm.
and to them, you are the occupier of several decades. And yes, in certain cases, a brutal occupier, and in other cases, one that's doing it out of necessity for its own survival. Yeah, it does happen. It did happen maybe more. I lived in Jerusalem. A lot of the taxi drivers were Palestinians, for example, and yeah, it happened with them, and you had really sweet, what would you consider sweet conversations of connection between the people. And these peoples can live together. They don't have any more inability to live with each other than Swedes and Norwegians. Fundamentally, like there are cities in Israel where people live mixed. Like Haifa is an example of multiple ethnic groups sharing a city. And yes, there is violence and there are problems and there are times when you could argue that the Arab populations are second-class citizens in Israel, but most of the time they live peacefully, they coexist. So it is possible, I guess, if you want a beautiful thought for the end. Yeah. And that another piece of complexity that people don't think about is that roughly 1/3 of Israel's population of people who are Israeli citizens are Palestinian Arabs.
After that time, what happened then? Because right now you're running your own podcast. What's in between?
So I had this excuse. I wanted to leave anyway, but I had this excuse that I was going to apply to. I thought that I had maybe have something to give to this world, so I should apply for the top universities in the world. Even though I had a place to study in Israel and I had been accepted and stuff, that was an option too. But then I applied to various places and I got into Cambridge, and that gave me like an easy explanation to everyone around me, like why we're now moving to the UK. And yeah, that I studied some politics and international relations there. And then partially maybe due to some not very well managed personal mental stuff from this experience. Like this is the second time in my life that I've cut all ties to one country and moved to a different one. Like some of this I didn't deal with, like why, what's going on, who am I, what do I want from life. So then there was the standard confusion of a graduate who was maybe a bit older than your average confused graduate who didn't quite know what to do. And I arrived in education where at least I got to work with nice people and kids and things like that. But I then didn't really want to commit to a life as a teacher, so I did some other jobs and tried to find the right answer. And yeah, now found that really my calling is running my mouth. And yeah, and for anyone listening to this, I mean, your podcast is awesome with these serious, deep philosophical topics. It's so good. Mine, yeah, I'm not, this depressive always. Mine also includes some jokes, you know. Yeah.
Nice. Thanks for calling the podcast depressive. Really appreciate that.
No, my stuff, you know, and my talking was got very serious. You know?
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
I can definitely recommend. I can definitely recommend it. As we talked about this a bit on the podcast that we did before this one. But your episodes are a lot shorter, so they're way more easy to consume, I think, than these ones, because these ones are generally multiple hours. They can go all the way up to, well, 3.5 hours, I think, is our longest one so far. It was episode 21. And yours are, well, the one that came out today, for example, you know, with the HR thing in it, was 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But generally, I think yours are like 30 minutes, something like that. And it's actually really, really fun. I got a couple of chuckles from it. It's really good.
Yeah. Well, I like to punctuate a serious topic with silliness. So then I've done like whatever autism and I just recorded with a transgender wrestler. So like I have these interesting guests, and then I'm serious, more serious, but then I throw in a few more jokey episodes as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I hope that, like, by the way, if anyone got upset by anything I said, or if it's just wrong or everything, yeah, that probably happens, you know. We could have talked about this for 5 hours, and I would have made 5 times as many errors and said 5 stupid things. But the value that I want to impart is just that, you know, maybe calm down, no fighting, Shakira, right?
What made you jump into the world of podcasting?
Well, just I thought initially people in my life had voices that need to be heard, but obviously if they wanted to be heard, they could have contacted someone and gone on someone else's podcast, right? But then there was a bit of narcissism too. I thought I had a voice that is valuable to at least someone. Small cult following at the moment, which is fun because, you know, maybe hopefully it grows. And I wanted to impart something valuable. Like a lot of my working life hasn't left a mark in this world, and this one, whether it's a funny mark or a serious intellectual mark or both, then great. That's the narcissistic side of it, and the just like you, also because it's fun, because it's nice to meet new people and create something and learn new things, right?
To have people on with all kinds of different wisdoms and experiences and expertises, just as yourself, because you've managed in this conversation to answer quite a bunch of questions. You might not maybe have done it perfectly. There might be better versions of the answer, but that doesn't matter. You're allowing me to learn in this specific situation, and at the same time, we're having a very fun conversation and a very insightful conversation, I think, and that's wonderful. The not just on an expertise level, but also on a personal level, right? To know and to learn and to hear what people do and where people go and what their experiences is. You know, we talked, for example, about the conversation from You Get, the French Canadian lady who came on a couple of episodes ago. Those are, well, they are very hard stories, obviously, but for multiple reasons. But they're still very wonderful. Story is not the right word here, but they're very good to hear and to know, and very important to hear and to know, I think. So to get those out there, that's valuable all around for me as a listener, and for everybody else who's listening, of course, but for the person also themselves, right? They may not have had the opportunity to tell their story ever, and this is their way of doing it. That it's wonderful all the way around.
Yeah. And you're right, yeah. I love that conversation with that poet. It was so deep. Yeah, we were laughing on my podcast earlier that I could never remain serious for too long. I guess everyone's favorite topic is themselves. So maybe when you're asking me questions, I can maintain a serious tone. But on any topic, like after a while, I would have to like puncture the air with some jokes.
Yeah.
So we're different. We're very different people. I think it's very admirable that you can just stay so deep in these conversations for so long. Yeah, I think it's takes a lot of emotional intelligence, which maybe I don't have. I have it with dogs, you know. I can hang out with a dog for 3 hours.
Right. Yeah, I heard it. I heard it come over in one of the episodes that you're a big dog person, but yeah, it really depends also on the conversation, because there are some kind of conversations that are more like an exploration, right? You are exploring an idea, or a wonderful experience, or a creative process, or something like that. And a very good example I can give there is the conversation I had with Mara Katria on episode 10. That didn't have video yet, so it's purely an audio conversation, but that was a conversation. I think I had my eyes closed for like 75 or 80% of the conversation, because Mara's just she's a brilliant storyteller, right? So with her voice and with the way that she speaks and with her intonation, she can make stuff come alive in the mind, right? You can see what she is saying pretty much. And there are scenes still that are coming into my mind right now just based on her words, and those are very fun, very interesting conversations to have. But you also have the conversations that are deep on a very different level. The one where you get, for example, was for me as a listener. Well, there was a moment in there that made me a bit emotional, because you hear the story from the person. The person is laying the story out there, and it's not like I'm waiting for them to finish what they're saying just so I can ask the next question, right? I'm trying to follow their story, try to follow their experience. And the moment that she laid out that, you know, she was dealing with her mother, who didn't maybe give her as much love as she should have given her, and then, you know, so you got with two other people who gave her that love, you know, and gave her those stories and gave her that attention and gave her that piggy bank, for example, that when her mother came back into the picture, she took it away again, you know, that stuff. And especially with the background that she laid out before that, you know, that very rough background. To me, I'm in that story, I'm listening to it. So what I'm seeing is a person, you know, is a young girl who doesn't have the expressive freedom in her life and is trying to find her own voice, and then finally has people around her that care about her and that want to facilitate her and provide for her and help her grow and that kind of stuff. And then that gets ripped away. Then it gets taken away by that. And I'm seeing that happen in front of me when the story is being told. And well, those kind of moments, those are very hard stories to listen to, and they're beautiful in their own way, right? They're important in their own way, but the point I'm trying to make here is it's not passive. It takes a lot of attention, and there are conversations in there that really recover from is not the right way to say it, but that really keep me in that story for hours after it is done. Another great examples, for example, with Adam Ayala, you know, the psychoanalyst, great friend by this point, by the way. I love that guy, great guy. But yeah, the moment we talk about trauma or sexual violence or those kind of things, right? Yeah, that's not surface level material. That takes a lot.
Takes a lot for people to talk about anything like that publicly, by the way. I mean, even people in our lives that we may want to get on the mic here, might find it a pretty large threshold to talk about a lot of things publicly. I've personally now only recently started dealing with the things that tough men don't talk about, right? I used to be very stiff upper lip and get over it kind of guy, but yeah. Now,
how did you get over that? Because I've been asking myself the same question. Like the moment that you start the podcast, and you mentioned this also in the previous episode, the moment you start the podcast, you make a very conscious decision to put yourself out there, which opens you up to a significant amount of risk. So I think we had the same question come up with, but what was your answer to that question? How did you come to that answer?
I was gonna say I don't give a. Do you do swearing on this platform?
Hey man, go right ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I don't give a hoot. I think I've stopped giving a hoot about what people think. If I find something valuable, like there will be an episode coming up about at some point about like maybe how soldiers like move on from this stiff upper lip attitude to being vulnerable or whatever it's going to be about. It's unclear, but still, this kind of stuff is, and for me, it's not all like, I don't have some kind of serious war-based PTSD or anything. It's more maybe family stuff as well. But I think the decision to be open about and vulnerable publicly, I think you just got to be in a place in your life where you stop giving a shit about what people think. On my product, at least, if I think it's valuable that I say this now, whether it's a joke or or whether it's a serious point, then I'll just leave it in, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then if the internet hatred comes, then let it come. I mean, that says more about usually the person who hates than it says about the person who receives the hate.
Yeah, and there's also a different side to it, I think, because it's not just the hate coming in, you know, the mean comments under your videos, for example, but it also has real life implications. So one of the things I ask myself is like, okay, I have, you know, and obviously the same goes for you. So I'm very curious how you thought about that. But for me personally, I have a wife, I have a family, I have a job, I have a community, you know, and everything that is going on a podcast on the internet stays there forever.
Yeah.
Right? So if you say something that is out of line with some of their expectations or some of their ideas, it puts it in peril. You know, if your employer doesn't approve of what you're saying, then you might have a problem on your job front. So for me, that specific thing that required a lot of thought on my side, like with the question, am I okay with this? Am I willing to take this risk that, you know, any of these things that I just laid out might get negatively impacted? The hate, I'm the same with you. I'm disagreeable enough to say, you know, screw that hate. I really don't care about it.
Mm-hmm.
But that other stuff I do care about.
Yeah.
And I assume it's the same for you. So how do you deal with that?
Well, that's what's so unfair with the internet, right? And or recordings of any kind, is that people stumble. If I in real life have this conversation, then afterwards people observe me grow as a person, and every 5 years cycles, I don't even recognize the person I was in the previous 5 years cycle in my life.
Right.
But people observe that in real life. Once you put something on record, then people can find this 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and that's their image of me, right? And and it will be that they, whether it's opinions, like whatever I've said today, my opinions might change tomorrow on some things, and that people in real life can observe, whereas you're now, and that relates to friends and family as well. I have in other public appearances maybe said things or formulated things poorly about the very same topics we covered today. And I know that there are my friends and family who may have been offended by those. That, yeah. Well, whatever. It's like we are talking stream of consciousness here, but yes, for other people, it's like a document of who you are, potentially forever. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for you, it's more important to keep your identity intact and to make sure you're genuine and authentic than to be complacent and to be silent.
Yeah. Well, of course, there's a trade-off, right? Coming out, making yourself vulnerable publicly, you need to receive something from it. For some people, it's money, economic success. For some people, maybe like me, it's more about that this is something valuable I can leave behind, whatever, or something I can leverage as a learning process to something more valuable in the future. So giving up your privacy and anonymity, you shouldn't do it if you value that more than what you potentially get out of this. And so far, obviously, none of those rewards happen in the early journey of a podcast or a public person of any kind. But when you look back in 10 years, you'd want to be proud of the fact that you put things on record. And that's, that's where I am. I may not right now, massively controversial topic. I don't know, maybe my neighbor sees it and he'll hate me forever because he's on the other, he disagrees with everything I said. And that's, now I've lost a relationship and gained nothing. But maybe 10 years from now, we'll see the value of it all.
Yeah, it's like a ripple effect.
Yeah.
And you don't know in advance.
Yeah. And I guess, well, another point in this conflict stuff we talked about end in your personal life. Like talking to people is always the answer, whether it's between countries or nations or just in your personal life. Talk about the hard stuff, because then you break this you break this wall of just keeping it in, you know, and that wall is just something that is only hurting you. It's only caving in on you. It doesn't, like, breaking it and making yourself vulnerable and, you know, mending bridges and crossing divides. That's always more rewarding than the other option.
This goes back all the way to our conversation on your podcast when you asked me about what prevents us from having or creating new friends in our 30s, when we talked about those walls that people, based on their experience, the walls that they create in their mind, which prevents them from talking and connecting with other human beings. And what you're saying right now is a complete opposite of that. You know, allow yourself to connect to others, talk to your neighbor. You know, figure them out. Let them figure you out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
man.
Wonderful. All right, man.
All right.
Let's wrap up with one final one.
Go ahead.
What's next for you? What are you going to do? What are your dreams?
I'm going to keep pushing out, hopefully, sort of one more serious episode, one more lighthearted one, into the foreseeable future, and hoping people enjoy them, and hoping I enjoy it. Regarding other things in life, you know, raising a family just like everybody else, trying to be happy, trying not to settle for contentness and complacency, trying to move forward.
Wonderful. Danny, thank you so much. For everybody watching and listening, definitely check out Danny's podcast, the Talking Ass podcast. It's very, very funny. Can definitely recommend it.
Just talking ass. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
just talking ass.
All right.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thanks, Danny.
Thanks.
Take care of yourself.
See you.